Thank you, Merritt. Thank you, Jason. I'm seated now with our four cloud service providers, and I'd like them to introduce themselves so we can chat a little bit more about what the cloud service providers are seeing as it relates to FinOps in the market.
Hey everyone, I'm Bryce Dickens, a principal FinOps strategist here with AWS, and I support the public sector.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jason Payne. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Microsoft Federal and support our customers' digital and cloud transformations.
Good afternoon, Eric Lam, and head of our Google Cloud FinOps consulting practice and work with customers across the commercial and public space.
Hi, my name is Rand Waldron. I run strategy and operations for Oracle's government and sovereign clouds globally.
Awesome. So, Bryce, we heard a couple of things earlier, and we heard that there are a lot of challenges in adopting FinOps and that agencies are really, in some cases, struggling to kind of figure out how to do that. Mm-hmm. From your point of view, what are some of the challenges you're seeing folks with, actually adopting FinOps and being able to take, full advantage of it?
Right now, we're seeing a lot of public sector customers are coming into the FinOps industry really for the first time. And the FinOps industry has really matured extensively over the last several years. And so one of the challenges that we see with public sector customers is they're coming in and they get sort of discouraged because they see the amount of things that they want to get to, but then they feel constrained by either trying to get visibility into the portfolio. And what I encourage all of our public sector customers to do is just take a step back and realize we're all here to help. We're all here to help break down a lot of those barriers that they would see with trying to adopt FinOps. And that would be the biggest challenge that I see is just don't get discouraged early on in that journey.
Awesome. So I guess I'd ask the same of the rest of the panel as well. Like, are there small pieces of low-hanging fruit that we like to refer to that you guys see typically adopted? Jason, I don't know if you have some experience with clients that are finding that small foothold to get away to better adopt FinOps across the organization.
Yeah, I think when we think about small steps, I kind of look at experimenting types of teams, right? I think kind of to Bryce's point, a lot of public sector agencies are beginning this journey. And what we often see with change in large public sector agencies is you need a pathfinder or someone to experiment with. And so I like to think of where we see success, it's small agencies or small projects within a large agency, taking the approach and taking the methodologies and applying them, and then using those successes and sharing them more broadly, and how they're able to sort of navigate the competing priorities that they have. And so I oftentimes think that small experimentation is really the way to begin to kind of grow the groundswell of experience with the new methodologies being introduced.
So I guess, Eric, building on that a little bit, we heard Jason and Merritt talk a little bit about how they can serverless and some of these technologies are going to have farther implications in the future for adopting FinOps. Are there specific types of projects or technologies or applications that you're seeing that are typically the first to be FinOps enabled, if you will?
Yeah, good questions. I think a couple of things to keep in mind of. One, the serverless architecture certainly provide more complexity in the sense where, tracking the costs and allocating those costs back to the individual entities or product teams, in this case, the agencies, can be challenging. Two, I think fundamentally getting the tagging or labeling correct and appropriately tag those resources at the right resource level will be very important. And then third area of cost is the shared services cost. So how do you distribute those costs back to the entities will be very important to be mindful of. So when we work with customers, whether it's in the commercial space or the public sector areas, we see similar challenges as well, right? So the whole idea of event-driven architecture, APIs, so embedding those resource tagging to every single API calls sometimes can be challenging, right? Because how do you enable those engineers and developers to make sure that their code up to date, embedded, shifting, FinOps left, if you will, right? Having those implemented early on in their software development life cycles.
Yeah. So, Rand.
I was going to say, I think that's at the absolute heart of it. So if you can get it like a coalition of the willing, a couple of engaged programs, engaged program managers, and some engineers who are actually interested in the idea. Because what FinOps does is it ties together cost and the engineering fundamentals in a way that doesn't really exist before. If you're going to buy $500,000 worth of servers, once they're in there and installed, how the engineers use them kind of doesn't impact cost really at all. Totally different in cloud. Yep. So you find that coalition of the willing, and then you find the engineers that are actually willing to engage in this problem set There will be some for whom this is intriguing and interesting and kind of clicks with them. And you can make progress really quickly with one of those teams when you link the engineers directly to that cost output. That can show that pathfinder that you'll see across the entire agency.
So I've heard a pretty consistent theme from all of you that getting someone to be the person who overcomes some of those initial challenges, be the pathfinder, be the person who wants to kind of work through those challenges is a critical component. When you are sitting with an executive who is trying to say, how do I get this? How do I find that pathfinder in my organization? Or if you're talking to one of those pathfinders, what are you telling them, more often than not, on how they should be looking at and thinking about, adopting FinOps for their organization?
I'll tell you, when I speak with executives, they actually already know. Meaning they know across their teams, there is one or two teams where that lady, that program manager, she's gonna love this idea and she's gonna love taking this apart and working with her team on it. They know which of their teams are the ones that are very likely to be engaged and will also bring a little bit of a halo effect to the whole idea. If you pick, you don't want to pick, you do want to pick a small, engaged, willing team. You don't want to pick one that nobody's ever heard of and is off by the side, because when they succeed, nobody cares, right? Yeah. You want to pick one that's cool, kind of everybody knows about and is willing to move forward. And I find that executives, most of them, the engaged executives, know which one or two or three of their teams. And then, frankly, the teams have to want it. If you force it, don't force it. And so you know what your top two or three kind of engaged, forward-thinking teams are. Engage with them, and you'll find one that'll run with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say too that a lot of the topics that we're hitting on is really organizational behavior and how you institute change management. And one of the things that for organizations who are first starting out in FinOps, they think of this as a technological solution. And really, it's a people and a processes situation. And even when we find those early pathfinders, what I encourage teams to do is be a student of success. When you have those initial wins, quantify that impact. And don't do it in terms of dollars. Quantify it in terms of the business impact that it's had, whether that was a reduction of risk for the portfolio, whether that was an improvement of the ability of the organization to execute quicker, move faster in the environment. Those are all things that we encourage our customers to certainly start peeling out those pieces to help get that buying and log roll those successes.
I would also add to that, I think, kind of to both points here, almost the best job of the executive at that point is being the advocate and knocking down the roadblocks that they're going to face, right, when taking on a new practice like this. Inevitably, there's something in an existing policy or a data feed that's not there, or something they need from the vendors, right, that they're currently not getting, or a level of support. And that executive's job is really to help with those kinds of things. I think I wholly agree with you. They know the secret squirrel teams that are going to succeed, right? And now their job is to really pave the way for that success to come.
Then they can go brag. The group that was on just before we came on, they were talking about try to quantify in terms of mission impact, this many citizen queries served or something like that. If you, as that lead executive, can then go brag about, hey, they did these FinOps things, they saved this funding, and because of that, we served citizens this much faster. We delivered this many more things for citizens. We have some national security mission that we did this much better. That's where it really starts to get traction. I cut you off.
No. I was just going to chime in that the executive sponsorship is so important. Can't emphasize it, strong enough, because I have seen many customers when they're starting with FinOps, starting from more from a silo engineering team perspective, rather than having that executive sponsorship to break those silos out, as you guys were talking about, and then bring the organizations together. Because to Bryce's point, it's not just a technology solutions, it's changing the culture and the mindset of the entire organizations. And without that executives sponsoring this change and this initiative, FinOps become more of a cost reporting capability function, which is not what FinOps is all about. No. I have worked with, on the commercial side, one of the banks like, oh, FinOps is just reporting costs. No, it's not.
I think that's actually a great segue into kind of my next question, Jason. I'll ask you. When we are seeing executives, take on this sponsorship role, what is it they're trying to solve for? What is the problem they're saying I need to talk more about? What are they going to go brag about to somebody else later on?
Yeah, I think specifically with something like FinOps at the executive level, in government agencies, it becomes a balancing of a lot of different priorities, right? We heard it from some of the earlier discussions around, you have executive orders for everything under the sun, right? You've got all kinds of new technology advancement coming, right? Everybody's excited about AI and the promise of AI, and you look at your IT portfolio and you've got a bunch of legacy systems on the side, you've got brand new net new things you want to do, and you really look at FinOps as the tool to say, well, how am I going to tweak and tune between all these different competing priorities and maximize my IT budget, right? And if I don't have that practice across that entire portfolio, I end up chasing a lot of things and I may not succeed. And so from that executive view, I almost think that problem solving there becomes one of the most critically important values.
Yeah.
One of the areas that we've already seen a lot of success in the federal space, or broadly public sector, is at the IT financial management perspective, with the prospects of TBM framework and being able to explain across the IT portfolio how is value being derived from the investments that are being made. And so when it comes to FinOps and a lot of the cloud focus there, what we also say is, when the question was posed, hey, what is a executive sponsor? What is their job? What are they trying to highlight? And what we say is it's highlighting the value of the investments made. So in those organizations that have a TBM practice, what we say is, hey, let's go see what they did. Let's go see how they got started. What were those pathfinders, and how do we replicate that success here with the FinOps practice as well?
Let's be direct about it, right? Like in a lot of these government agencies, IT spend is a zero-sum game. And maybe next year it's going to be a negative-sum game. Yeah. And so any dollar you spend on that innovation, it's got to come from somewhere. And then pretty soon you have to explain why you're spending so many dollars on that innovative cloud thing. And FinOps gives you the ability to coherently look across that entire portfolio, make sure that you are addressing those and you're taking advantage of all the opportunities to manage that cost, rather than just doing it as whack-a-mole. Why'd this program get so expensive? And next month it's, this program's the expensive one. No, FinOps gives you an approach where you can tackle that holistically, and in a zero-sum budgetary environment, if you're not doing it, your life is going to be chasing down one bad bill after another.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So since we've talked a lot about, kind of implementing FinOps now, in public sector organizations that are successfully doing it, what are you seeing that's making them successful? I mean, we talked about champions and some of those things, but are there other either tangible or intangible items you guys are seeing that are really saying that's a thing that made you successful, that enabled FinOps? Eric, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think similar to the commercial side, I would say, is the training and awareness, right? So I think getting the organizations enabled, but also getting them trained about what FinOps practices is all about. I think that is a very early step to drive adoption at scale, right? The second part where I've seen success is, which we have talked about earlier, is demonstrating those quick early wins, where that through efficiencies of cost optimization initiative, or what's the unit sort of metrics of the savings efficiencies being captured and realized. And then ultimately, how do you reinvest those to drive innovations? I think what's different from public sector versus the commercial is always maximize value, and in a way that we can drive increased business revenue and growth. In the public sector side, it's about how do you stabilize the budget, how do you provide more predictability to your forecast, so that you know exactly how much you're going to spend for the year, how much you're going to forecast for the next few years, and so forth. So I think those are the key challenges I've seen, and differences, I would say, right, between commercial and public. But I think getting those right will be important for the public sectors.
Yeah.
One of the opportunities that we have organizations do all the time is create a North Star. Understand upfront, if you're going to be successful, what does that look like in the future? And then work backwards from there. In organizational behavior, we would talk about how you unfreeze an organization, move them, and then refreeze in the behaviors that you want. Same part of that is that the mechanism to unlock and unfreeze the organization starts with painting a North Star. And that's going to be critical for any long-term success.
I could not agree with that more. I spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about technology first and working with customers technology first, right? I could spend all day talking about AI and cyber, but like it's AI and cyber to what end, right? Like that North Star is critically important. And I think if you're getting started, you have to say, what is the goal you're trying to achieve, right? And I think what we heard in the coffee break, it was, what was it, $3 per military service member, and I want to get that to $2.78. That's very tangible for us to measure against and know the impact of. Now, there's a lot of details in how we might get to that $2.78, or we end up at $3.12, right? And there's a learning there, but that North Star, critically important.
That alone is half the battle. Like once you get a customer, an agency that knows that they need to start focusing on this, right? So they're not born knowing they need to focus on this. Their very first project to cloud, their second, their 20th project to cloud, they may not have been thinking about this, but they reach a moment where they're like, whoa, we got to think about this. And then once they think about it, once they set a North Star, a target like that, that literally is half the battle. Because there are a lot of ways from then. There's tooling that we all provide, there's other tools, there's projects that will lead the way. But getting that focus from the very beginning, that we need to do this, this is important across our portfolio, and I'm going to set a target, a North Star, that really makes sense for all of us. That's truly half the battle.
So, Rand, that's great that you brought that up, actually, because I think that's part of the thing that we're talking about here is, a lot of folks dive into something Eric touched on earlier. FinOps is just reporting. This is data. I want a spreadsheet. I want a nice chart that says this is what it is. That's the end of it. I think us on the stage would agree that's probably not really where we're targeting from FinOps holistically. So organizations will often ask things like, hey, should we start with optimizing servers? Should we start with writing a policy and procedure and governance on how to do this? I guess give us your perspective a little bit on, where should they start tactically when they're getting into this?
Yeah, I may not be the best person to ask this. I have built a lot of software in the government and in cloud. Build it, like start. I would worry a little less later about policies. The policies can catch up. Once you find that coalition of willing, that engaged program team, and you get them really focused, they can literally get into their environment and start working with it. They can get into their environment and start understanding today what the spending is like, what's driving the spending, how they go deeper, how they tie that back up to their organizational metrics. You can literally just start doing it. And then obviously you're going to need to propagate a set of policies to drive it across your entire portfolio, across the entire organization. So it's not that that's irrelevant, but it's better to lead with the work and have the policy come in parallel or maybe just behind. If you lead with the policy and then take some time for the work and the engineering to come behind, at least in that Pathfinder program, you may never get there.
So I have a slightly different perspective. I believe that you need a strong foundation. I believe that you need standards and processes defined to create that foundation. That is one of the key reasons why we want FinOps to be started early in any customer's journey. Because if you think about FinOps as an afterthought, after you migrate all the workloads to the cloud and try to come back to fix those issues, those tagging, those labeling and all that resource hierarchy can be very complex and challenging. And in ways that can be even more expensive than trying to do it right in the beginning. So fixing it versus start in the right path, right? So I would say that having that foundation, the standards, the process in place will be very important. And then you can enable more workloads to be migrated or developed on the cloud.
So I kind of land, I think, between both of them, right? If we could just cover all sides of the argument there. But I actually agree with starting with doing it first from the perspective of the foundation, the Pathfinder, and it being a cultural change within an organization. I do think, to your point, the policy has to come quickly afterwards, and it has to be informed about what works within the context and culture of your organization, or you're left with a bunch of FinOps technical debt or something, right? How do you manage out of that? And I think specifically when it comes to policy and process too, the sweet spot there is having it be principle driven and sort of outcome driven and not practice or prescriptive, right? And I think getting that right so that your pathfinders and then your policy, and then that brings the rest of the agency along, that can be difficult, but I think that's the little sweet spot to be in.
It's going to be very, very hard for organizations to try to navigate both paths and try to figure out one or the other. And what I tell our customers is sometimes you are painting the walls as you're moving in. Yeah. But hey, the reality is even before you've moved in, you've selected the paint color, you've decided on the movers, you know which rooms you're going to be moving into as you move into the house. So same way, what we encourage our customers to do is at least get the default tooling in place. There's the default tooling in any provider. Get that stuff turned on. Your future self will thank your past self for doing that. But leverage an understanding of what policies are you going to need so that as you're working with those tools, you can take notes and say, hey, we know we're going to need a tagging strategy. Even if you only require one tag, or even if it's just for auditing purposes, but you're going to need a tagging strategy. You don't have to boil the ocean today, but as you're enabling the tools, understand how the policy will inform the tools. Understand that when you're communicating to the different organizations and rolling this practice out, you can at least set the expectation there will be something coming. And we can also relate this back to something that may come up later is how do you ingrain FinOps into the identity of a DevOps engineer or the hands on the keyboards individuals? And one of the things that we encourage our customers to do is speak their language, talk in terms that are common to them. And so whether that's the scaled agile framework or some other methodology, as part of that, there's a feedback loop. And so as you're rolling out the tools and you're helping to define that policy, have that feedback loop to know that you're going to need to revisit those policies. That's not set in stone, and be willing to receive feedback and update those policies as well.
I think you guys have made some great points in that we're starting to see the government take on some of these in kind of both ways, and I'll speak to the federal government for a second, but we're seeing things like the DoD FinOps guidance being published now. That's, kind of a new thing, well, very new thing that is very recent, but also new that the government is finding space and need to make policy for those sorts of things and otherwise directives. We're also seeing, the FinOps Foundation adding lots of kind of input on how organizations can help, comply with some of these things, follow up with mandates. And I think that's really a nice step from them being able to say, do a little bit of, kind of all of what we're saying here. Yeah. Mandates are coming down from the top. This needs to be done, but they're kind of broad and overarching. And then, some of the kind of grassroots, hey, we're doing this thing, and we'll back into the compliance later on. So I think that's a really interesting thing. Okay. I guess with that, in these organizations that are, successfully adopting FinOps, and we heard a little bit from the NIH earlier and some others, what are the downstream effects? Like we've talked a little bit today about, hey, it's great to go brag about the fact that I can tell you what the cost is per military service member. But I guess I'm curious what some more of the hidden ripple effects are, or what you've seen in some of these organizations where they're saying, we didn't expect that outcome, but it was a nice positive or potentially a nice negative, an unfortunate negative of the situation. Bryce, I guess I'm curious if you've seen something like that.
The biggest thing that we've seen a lot of customers get value out of investment in a FinOps practice is being able to understand who's consuming, why are they consuming it, and how are they consuming that particular opportunity. And from that, they're able to link back to say, hey, when we originally came to the cloud, it's because we needed on-demand consumption models. We needed elasticity of our portfolio. And from a FinOps practice, they can understand and tell that story. Are we meeting that original mission objective? Are we able to accomplish what we originally set out for? Which is a big part of FinOps and being able to tell that story.
Yeah. I've been surprised by how many customers have said it actually made their systems better. So not just they found they could report on the finances better or manage the financial impacts better or run better metrics, but literally the practice of getting in there and understanding everything that was going on and why it was happening and how it impacted cost gave them another metric to be able to look into their systems and say, oh, I guess we didn't need all this, or we're doing that in an inefficient way, and if we do this, we don't have to pay that license anymore, and holy mackerel, the whole system's better. And that is something that essentially nobody expects it to be another view into system quality, but it actually is another view into system quality.
Yeah, it's interesting you actually bring that up. We've seen some folks actually starting to use it as a security metric as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
When they start seeing, cost and change otherwise, whoa, we weren't expecting that this month.
Yeah.
What
Somebody's
happened?
mining Bitcoin on your servers. And,
Yeah. Hopefully not. But, and so I guess with that, we're starting to talk a little bit about implementation. We're talking a lot about kind of getting into the weeds here. Are there, and some of you have former, kind of commercial experience and public sector experience, are there key differences you're seeing amongst the types of public sector clients? So for example, we see a lot, we've talked a little bit here today about the fact that some of our programs start small. So I think with a lot of our state and local clients, we're seeing much smaller organizations, someone kind of stepping up as a grassroots campaign and saying, I want to implement this for my system. I think on the federal side, we're seeing a little bit more of the top down and, our agency is going to do FinOps because that's the way. I guess I'm curious, and Jason, I'll come to you for this a little bit. Like, are you seeing differences kind of across the larger ecosystem, but depending on the types of clients you're working with?
I think the easy answer to that is yes. I don't know how to answer it any more directly than that. So I cover civilian defense and intelligence customers in the federal market, and you might imagine they are all completely different in the way that they think about their budgets, the execution of those budgets, and the executions of those missions. And there's every flower in the field, if you will, right? And so I think the short answer really is yes. There's no one size fits all. And I think kind of to the points earlier about it being an organizational and cultural journey, you have to find a way to work that into what works for that agency. I think we can all stick to the framework, we can stick to the principles, and we can stick to the practices, but I think tailoring is absolutely key to drive it to success.
Eric, you mentioned a little bit earlier, some of the commercial experience you bring. I guess tell us a little bit more about some of the differences you see there from the commercial side to the public sector side.
Yeah, I think there are certainly a lot of similarities for sure, right? In the commercial space, you still have silo organizations, silo teams. So with FinOps being a cultural shift, how do you bring those organizations together, the different entities, the agencies, and so forth? That's one. I think the second part is how do you provide that transparency, right? So you want to make, to Jason's point, tailored metrics even, right? Dashboards and so forth that's specific to the individual teams or personas. Like if I'm a CFO, what I care about is what's my actual spend versus my forecast, right? Because that's going to be important for my end of quarters reporting and my shareholders' values and so forth. In another case where I see the difference with the public sector side, I was imagine there's a lot more regulations, right? The processes, getting through approvals, procurement of new technologies, new tools. In the commercial space, you can easily go through a POCs and just roll that out. Public sector, not so much, right? So you have to go through a very detailed approval process and ensuring that you have the right contractors and so forth. So, and then ultimately, we talk about the value metrics, right? So it's all about having, the fiduciary responsibility for the tax holders versus the shareholders of the organization to drive revenues, right?
Yeah. So, Rand, we've talked a little about differences here across even within public sector itself. Are there patterns you see where, hey, defense typically is starting here or doing this, civilian doing something a little different? I guess are there some things you could share from those insights?
Yeah, I think there are patterns, but they're at a lower level. It is harder to say all of defense or all of intel or all of state and locals approaching a problem the same way. I think you are finding, and where I see a lot of similarities, is it the person who really holds the budget, and so there is somebody who has the budget and whose job is to make sure that they're actually going to meet that budget next year. You're going to be able to deliver all those citizen services for 3% more people or this much more mission, but you've got the same amount of money. And what I'm seeing is at that level, there ends up being a lot of similarity because that problem replicates itself 100,000 times across the US government. I have a certain amount of money. I have more mission than that money. My money's not growing. Somehow my cloud bill is. What is FinOps? And that pattern of thought, that I see very similar at that level. And I wouldn't draw that across the whole IC or the whole defense. I would say at a budget holder, you see a really similar chain of thought. And it just goes back to where we exactly started this conversation. They get to that, okay, what is FinOps? Does it help me solve this problem? You start to say, great, set a North Star, find your coalition of the willing. Where's your innovative team who's going to embrace this? And you go down that path. That train, you can almost replicate across hundreds, thousands of budget holders across the entire government, whether they're Los Angeles County executive or whether they're a budget holder in the Department of Defense. That train of thought tends to be very consistent.
One key area that we see a lot in the public sector. So as part of my career, I was the cloud cost manager at ExxonMobil before coming into this world of the public sector, right? And one of the key differences is color of money. You know, in the private sector space, it's not that color money doesn't matter, but you have flexibility and leeway to create a business case, move funds, and make things happen. Not so much in the public sector space because legality really matters. And one of the unsung abilities of FinOps is not necessarily to make sure that you're maintaining or not going over budget, but also look for those areas where you're running under budget. Because you do have some nominal flexibility, even within an existing portfolio, to say, hey, what did we miss about this? Why are we running under? And can we leverage this before fiscal year end in other pockets to accelerate growth or accelerate some type of innovative idea?
Yeah, so Rand, you mentioned that the pattern is kind of consistent there against those who hold the budget. These are the things where the thought process is the way we're going about that. I guess I'm curious, and Bryce, I'll start with you and then kind of walk around the panel here. Tactically, when it comes to the engineer doing the design, the architect who's coming to it, once they have a FinOps program in place, what are the kinds of changes they're making, speaking at a high level, obviously, that are helping them make the biggest impact with FinOps?
Shifting left, I think Eric had mentioned that earlier, is when organizations have fully matured in their FinOps practice, one of the things that is going to be resident within the organization is they've shifted left in the software development lifecycle. And for those that may not be familiar in the audience, that's when, as part of the design and architecture stages of software development, even at those earliest stages, cost is a consideration in the deployment. Now, it's not to say that cost is a barrier. What we're saying is cost is being visible up front. And you have an opportunity to say, hey, where have we already potentially deployed this in the portfolio that we could take lessons learned so that we don't, by design, have to come back and create efficiencies.
Yeah. Jason?
Yeah, I think one of the places that I'm seeing folks do it is particularly in the context of functional versus non-functional requirements, right? A lot of times the non-functional requirements kind of hit the floor. And are maybe put to the side in favor of the functional requirements because those are the things that we can click and see and do and we see sort of direct value out of. But a lot of times those non-functional requirements are the ones that are critically important at the end of the day, right? That support either resiliency or availability or recovery of a type of an application. And I think to be able to look at the cost opportunity of what those features or functionalities might be and the downstream effects of the impact of those, whoopsies in the night or whatever we might want to call them. I think, really shining a light on that allows us to build, more effective and resilient applications when we need them to put a spotlight on some of those non-functional requirements.
Yeah. Eric?
Yeah. Two things I would say. One is, unwarranted cloud spike spend. I think that will be key. And the second is getting that North Star, which Bryce mentioned, in understanding the unit economics. And many customers struggle with that for sure, even today. And so able to achieve and able to correlate what's your underpinning technology spend to your business growth, or from this case, from a public sector perspective, right? Understanding what that unit metrics will be very important. And successful organizations able to adopt FinOps are able to articulate that.
Right?
I'm seeing people move all the way to the left into procurement, and to take the spirit of FinOps and begin it into how are they going to actually procure, how are they going to make their analysis of alternatives decisions around cloud costs. So all our clouds are not commodities, and all of our financial models are not the same. And so you can look at a particular cloud provider for a particular system will actually be quite different across our different financial models. So there may be a particular system because of the way it's configured, because of the licensing it requires, other things, is expensive in a particular cloud provider and significantly less in another cloud provider. And then you can literally take the very next system and it may flip. That's not to say that one cloud provider is always cheaper. It's the different systems fit differently into each of our financial models for all sorts of reasons. many of my customers are starting now to look at how they can bring that awareness into procurement. They're already multi-cloud for whatever set of reasons, and now they're starting to say, okay, as I determine a destination for this particular system, are there things in this system, for some systems there aren't, but are there things in this system that have to differentiate across the various cloud providers? Because then I might have to put into one cloud provider, do a ton of engineering to make it financially viable, and another cloud provider, it's less. And again, that's not a cloud provider point, but that's just where I'm seeing cloud customers go far to the left. Not even now my implementation into the cloud, but before it.
Planning.
Which cloud am I procuring for this system? Or how am I making my multi-cloud environment work so that I can make procurement choices like that system by system?
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point too. I guess I'm curious to dive in on that a little bit. From a tactical point of view, we see things like change control boards or other things where that's a kind of historical way in which many have brought groups together to discuss changes to systems, architecture, kind of, otherwise figure out a problem. So when it comes to even going as far left in procurement with, hey, we're going to pull FinOps back early, what is the mechanism by which they're actually bringing those groups together to have that conversation? Is it as simple as, hey, we're calling a meeting, we have this big thing coming out, or is there kind of a more intentional, regular occurrence, or is there driven by an issue that's happening? Kind of what are you seeing from that perspective?
I mean, at its simplest, in the federal government, we're seeing AOAs, analysis of alternatives, where the contracting groups are asking the program management teams for particular systems to at least have made a conscious assessment. This particular system, I'm not just going, we have 3 cloud providers, we have 4 cloud providers, I'm not just going to, I don't know, the one I used yesterday. For this particular system, I'm making a conscious assessment, and nobody, I'm not seeing at least, where this is becoming a dartboard and people are aggressively attacking the program manager for choosing the wrong one, but just proof, evidence that they made a conscious assessment. I looked at the cloud providers, given the dynamics of this particular system, it doesn't matter. Any of the 4 are great, and so we're going to this one. Or I looked at this system, given the dynamics of how it's architected and some of the things it pulls along with it, it really does need to go to this cloud provider. That's what I'm seeing most, and it tends to be actually, if done right, a supportive conversation rather than an inquisition. And if you make it cumbersome, then people will duck it. They will go around it. They will find a way out of it. But if you just make it like, hey, show me that you've thought about this particular system in the various clouds, that becomes very supportive, moves forward quickly, and it's helping people also create that trail to prove that they did that thinking and they're good stewards of the taxpayers' money.
It's interesting. There's 2 points here when you talk that I think he'll illustrate not only the differences in the commercial and the public sector, but also talk about one of the unsung heroes of a FinOps journey, and that's your procurement officer.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that individual is
from
very,
villain
very
to hero. That's right.
Yeah. So for those in the audience, if you don't know who that is, I would encourage you to go make friends real quick. Yeah. But that individual is going to be very key in helping understand not only which direction to take necessarily from a procurement decision, but also being able to understand just the contract vehicles that can be leveraged in pursuit of different opportunities. So I would say that that's certainly a good illustration of those 2 different worlds.
Actually, in the commercial space, I've seen head of global procurements leading FinOps. So there's becoming more and more common. We always often talk about CTO, CIO, organization, and CFO, but procurement are getting involved. They're very interested in FinOps, and they want to drive FinOps initiatives. So I'm seeing more and more of that as well.
Interesting. So changing gears a little bit on you guys here, when it comes to things like sustainability, we see in commercial practices a lot, we hear a lot more talk about sustainability. I'm starting to see in the government spaces, we're having clients start to ask about, what is the impact of my agency, when it comes to our compute spend? How is that impacting sustainability? I guess I'm curious, could any of you share some experiences where you've either had conversations with clients about where that intersection of sustainability and their FinOps spend is, or other conversations that might be relevant where we're seeing public sector clients talk about sustainability?
So I think maybe I can start with that one. Just I don't, in the context of FinOps, I haven't quite seen that one yet, and I think that's probably a reflection of kind of the public sector discussion we've had here of maybe the maturity of where the customers are. To your point, though, Chris, we've definitely had customers ask the question, And I think broadly sort of about, maybe I'll just call it clouds and data centers, right? Like we all have very large footprints. We consume a lot of electricity. The projections for that are only ever increasing, certainly given the demand for increased AI and sort of cyber capabilities. And so I do think that we will begin to see more questions in that vein, but for the broad sort of maturity level of where a federal or a public sector agency is right now, I don't know that it is the primary driver in FinOps. I think it's almost down to what Rand was talking about earlier, was I'm the budget holder and I need to drive efficiency, right? I think that's where we are today. Tomorrow, I think probably a very different story.
I'm starting to see it in international RFIs. So I have a global portfolio, and every European RFI that comes out today is talking about sustainability. Walk me through how you do sustainability. Walk me through, I have seen requests to explain how we'll teach them about how particular architectures drive sustainability.
Right, yeah.
Hey, if I use VMs versus serverless, does that impact my sustainability footprint? It's like mind blown. I think that'll take a while before it gets to the US. Also, we tend to buy cloud on really large procurement vehicles that last years. But I'll bet on the next refresh of some of our hyperscale procurement vehicles that we all live and die by, I bet they come out next time. That might be 3, 4, 5 years from now. They come out with sustainability criteria. I think you're absolutely right. I don't see it a lot yet in the US, but it'll be there.
It's definitely in the international space. I have a teammate that certainly supports our European sector. And he's had to do that several times, is get engaged with customers to understand, hey, what are those mechanisms that FinOps can help drive? Some of the easy low-hanging fruit in that area is going to be with just turning stuff off when you don't need it.
Use less.
Use less,
So we are seeing that certainly on the international side, just not here in the US.
Well, with our final few minutes here, I guess I'd like to give you each an opportunity to just give us, a little bit of a vision of the future. Obviously, we see a lot of things around AI, we see serverless, we see edge computing, we see lots of other new things that are continuing to be impactful in the way public sector is adopting cloud. Give us 30 seconds on where you see not only the public sector going, but I guess where FinOps in particular in public sector is going. Bryce, I'll start with you.
Maybe this is a shameless plug for the FinOps Foundation. We're starting to see the maturity in the special interest group for the public sector. So for those in the audience, if you have an opportunity, I'd say get plugged in there. But it's really indicative of, you see the federal space as a whole maturing in that area. So you're seeing identities and personas being personified in the federal space. You see that Office of the CIO is now becoming very in tune and involved with that perspective. So I see, the federal sector quickly ramping up right behind commercial with that, because commercial's laid the groundwork. And so there's already a path for what does a blueprint look like for maturity.
When I think about maybe the future, I look at just the word itself, the FinOps, the ops part of it, right? And just sort of the history of IT and where we've been. We've had DevOps, SecOps, DevSecOps, AIOps, or MLOps, AIOps. We've got FinOps, right? I think all of that, what that really shows is that technology and transformation is complex, right? And I think looking forward into public sector and any large sort of organization, success with technology is knocking down the silos, right, across teams, collaboration, and cohesion around a single set of goals. And I think that's sort of the North Star, really, at the end of the day, of how organizations that succeed with technology at scale. The pace of change that we've seen with technology over the last couple of years has been incredible. I don't think you need like a really bright crystal ball to realize that is not going to slow down. So I think that's really where I see it going.
Eric?
3 things that I think agree to what Jason was saying, that FinOps is going to permeate across multiple ops, right? Yeah. Sustainability, green ops, right, for sure. AI ops, everything else, I think will become innate within the organizations. 2 is a cultural shift. So everyone's instilling that cost-conscious mindset to every single level of engineers. I think will be very important. And then 3rd, certainly, how do you drive it at scale through automations and AI for FinOps? And that will be the immediate as far as enabling adoption of FinOps at scale.
Coming from Eric's number 2 there, what I see and what I want to see is every developer thinks about what's the performance of their system, did it pass the unit test, if it compiles, ship it. I want that. I want the tooling and the cultural shift in the individual engineers that they are thinking about how performant is my system, how resilient it is. Can I do that quarterly failover? And by the way, at my unit test, what's it cost? And that way, all the way down to those developers, they aren't thinking of cost management as like an oppressive new mandate. It's just one of the levers they need to optimize for. And I think the tooling is getting there. The right people are already there, but it's pretty unique perspective on the world. I think in 5 or 6 years, it won't be. I think that developers, especially developers that are what I'll call cloud native, born and raised in their development environment in the cloud, are literally thinking about every single dime. They all know our free tiers and how far you can push it and what you can do. And that will permeate into the development of every system, is they will be thinking about the performance, the quality, and the cost of literally every unit, every module of code, and that will be a breakthrough.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank all 4 of our panelists for joining us here today, and I'm going to turn it back over to Merritt to talk about reserved instances and savings plans.